Welcome back. Let's move away from issues around politics and talk about the generality of the policy. But this time we're talking security. There's been a lot of concerns. The carnage on the plateau, the carnage in Benue, the killings in Borno, the killings in Taraba, the kidnappings in part of the south. We can just go on and list some of the challenges we have. And we understand that one of the major issues is that there are foreign invaders encroaching into our borders and wreaking havoc in that sense, killing our people, and we're quite familiar with what is going on. But the Chief of Defense Staff the other day made a statement that got a lot of people talking and got everybody curious. He gave examples of countries where, as part of measures to restore peace and order in their country, they had to build walls around their borders. And he gave dimensions. And he's saying that maybe that is the right way to go for Nigeria. So the big question is, should Nigeria be contemplating building borders? How will this help the issue of insecurity in parts of the country? Being joined in the program to explore this, the men who understand how security works in Nigeria and around the world. Mr. Kabiru Adamu is a security risk management expert and the MD Beacon Security Intelligence Limited. Also joining us is Major Adebayo Adeleke. He's a retired immigrant U.S. Army officer, human security expert. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Thank you.
All right, let me start with you, Mr. Adamu. And I'm going to ask the same question to both of you, just your overview of that comment by the CDS. So the question is that the way to go, building walls around our border?
Yeah, so I was at the event where he made that comment. It was an event organized by the Voice of Nigeria to support citizens' engagement. And the Chief of Defense Staff reeled out the several security challenges in the country. And in talking about measures to address those challenges, he mentioned the need to have construct a fence, as it were, across our borders. He didn't go into the how. But then, I asked myself, the border that we have, the length of the border is about 4,477 kilometers. And that's the land border. And there are about 4 countries thereabout. The one that concerns me is Niger, which has about 1,497 kilometers of shared border with Nigeria. And then Cameroon, which has 1,690 kilometers of shared border in Nigeria. Now, across these shared borders are forests, rivers, savanna, mountains, deserts. And then so I now asked myself, when the US constructed a border between the United States and Mexico, how much did it construct that border? Now, estimates suggest between $2 million to $5 million.
Is there a reason why?
Dollars per kilometer of that fence. So if you now multiply that by the 4,407, we're talking of about between $9 billion US dollars to $22 billion US dollars to construct such a fence. Now, it tells me that first, it will be very difficult for Nigeria to, get that amount. And remember that this does not include maintenance. It doesn't include surveillance technology that will be required on the fence. It also does not include the environmental mitigation that may be necessary when you are constructing such a wall or a fence across the border. So budget feasibility would be a challenge. And then the construction across this forest, rivers, savannas, mountains, desert would also be a huge challenge. And even if, for instance, the construction takes place, what is going to stop the bad guys from coming to bomb places along the fence? And then, of course, we're back to where we are. So these are some of the considerations for me at the beginning. There are other components that perhaps in the course of the conversation we can explore, such as the effectiveness of the wall, if at all it is constructed, and then the consequences on our diplomatic relationships with our neighbors, as well as the cultural impact it will have, given the closeness between certain communities within the border area.
All right, Major Adeleke, your quick take on this issue of building walls around our border.
Thank you and good morning. And it's a pleasure actually speaking here. And Mr. Adamu, we've chatted a few times, but we've never really met one-on-one. So when I read the news that the Chief of Defense Staff made this comment, I'm not shocked at all. General Chris Musa is quite intelligent and a very solid army officer, so I know exactly where he's coming from. Because if you look at the threat analysis of Nigeria, majorly a lot of the fighters that we see in Nigeria are coming, they are external to Nigeria. So I understand the reason, the need for this war to be constructed. And if you look at the historical context as well, is it the Great War of China? Is it the Berlin War? Is it the Durand Line that was mentioned in the Pakistan and Afghanistan borderline, which I'm quite familiar, especially in Speed Bulldog and all these areas. I'm quite familiar with that. And also with the one with Saudi as well. I understand all these construction, even the United States as well, because the United States is doing it for something else. But the use of fence or wall to kind of mitigate inflow of people into certain country has been used is an age-long methodology. So there's a pros and cons to it as well. But in the Nigerian context, and we can actually relate what General Chris Musa is actually insinuating with that of India, with that of Pakistan and Afghanistan, which that was actually occurring during what we call the Pashtun land. If you've ever been in that area, you understand exactly what I'm talking about, because the same set of tribes is actually found in Afghanistan and also in Pakistan. And the same thing, I think, we can be likened to what we might see in Nigeria, because most of our borders, especially in northern part of Nigeria, actually, they have the same community across the board. The thing about borders, the reason about using fences and wall is that it's a tactical solution to a structural and strategic problems. It can deter, it stands as a deterrent for a while, and after that it becomes an issue. So I understand in the meantime to hold the line, but at what cost? As Mr. Adamu said, is the cost of constructing these fences, depending on what kind of construction you go to, with the barbed wires or what of real wall. And particularly, war in this dispensation cannot stand alone. It's not a standalone solution. It has to be accompanied with governance. So you cannot substitute war for security governance. And also, actually, what I took out of this conversation that General Chris Musa made is a larger conversation about security architecture, our national security architecture in Nigeria, because a lot of this security burden has been put on the shoulders of Nigerian military. And I think the Ministry of Interior and every other ministry out there also share a line of effort when it comes to the issue of security. So you cannot talk about the ungoverned spaces in these porous borders of Nigeria without talking about the effort that's been done by the Ministry of Interior and also the other security architecture within Nigeria. I think that's a larger question, or the bigger question we need to be asking ourselves, not only from the military side of for the how, but also what are the other ministries doing? What are the customs doing? What are the Ministry of Interior doing to actually mitigate the inflows of fighters from foreign countries to Nigeria? But it is if it is done, it's going to be damn expensive. More importantly, because Nigeria has a lot of high priority, and I think this particular one is going to be very hard to pass. But more importantly, it's a short-term solution for a larger strategic problem.
Well, I wonder it's not also, if this proposal is not also intelligence to the men of questionable character who are accessing Nigeria through those porous borders. But that's another subject for another day. What's more important is the size of the boots on the ground. And just days ago on our platform, the Chief of Naval Staff was talking about inadequate manpower within the naval part of the armed forces, 30,000. And it seems this is a continuing conversation that is leading, making very little progress, that Nigeria seems to be making very little progress on. Mr. Adamu, do you think that this is a fallout of having a technocrat, or if you like, a politician, in the office of the Ministry of Defense, rather than, a man of the armed forces, which was part of the conversation at the time of the constituting of the cabinet of the administration? Mr. Adamu.
of the regulatory body, in this instance, the Ministry of Defense, and more importantly, the Ministry of Interior, because border, the agency that is primarily responsible for border management, which is the Immigration Service, is actually under the Ministry of Interior. So maybe our focus should be on the Ministry of Interior and not necessarily on the Ministry of Defense. But having said that, both ministries should have the capacity for regulatory oversight of the agencies under them. And I think that is one of the gray areas in our current conversation when we are looking at the security architecture. I always like reminding us that there are 29 ministries, departments, and agencies that are responsible for security in Nigeria. Each of them has a crucial role to play. And when we downplay that role, then we now see gaps. If we shift the responsibility of all the 25 on the 4 that are under the military, as it were, the Navy, the Air Force, the Army, and to an extent the intelligence wing of the defense wing, then the other 25, frankly, this 4 cannot do the work of the 25. So it is with this eye, with this prism, that I'm kind of responding to your question. Yes, the capacity of the Ministry of Defense for regulatory oversight of the military is absolutely important, but what is even more important is the regulatory capacity of the Ministry of Interior on the agency that has primary responsibility for border management, and that is the Immigration Service, as well as to an extent the customs. Now, when you bring all of them together, then we may now start seeing results. Of course, we need more boots on the ground, but those boots are more immigration boots and then more customs boots. The military can support, perhaps because of the nature of the threat that we're dealing with. It is terrorism, and no civil or paramilitary organization can counter such a threat. The military must come in to support that, but once the military kind of creates the environment, then these other agencies must take over and carry out that function. The second part of my response would be the role of the National Assembly, the committees of the National Assembly, both in the House of Rep and in the Senate, that have responsibility for oversight for these organizations, defense and interior. They have a crucial role to play, both in budgeting as well as operational oversight. And so it's only when we bring all of this together that we may now start seeing the results that we aspire for.
All right, Mr. Adeleke, I wonder if you have additional response to the same question. But in addition to that, in your own estimation, by how much percentage will the construction of fences around the borders solve the insecurity challenge?
It's hard to say, because you have to look at the geographical features. You know, geography is destiny. So look at that particular point in time, what they are trying to do, in what area, what's the intelligence saying, in what inflows. But as I always say, the enemy also has a vote in this. As you are constructing the war, they also looking at the ways to exploit the wars as well. We've seen this in the American and Mexican war as well. So just to echo what Mr. Adamu said, and I think I've said this on this particular show and many others, is the fact that, and I'm going further than Mr. Adamu on this, all MDAs in Nigeria has a line of effort towards security. And because a lot of all these MDAs have kind of reneged on their responsibility, everything falls on the shoulder of the military, either the kinetic or non-kinetic efforts. And all these things are all encompassing to solve some of this problem. The Ministry of Interior has a larger role to play in border management on the governed spaces of Nigeria. And unfortunately, until assessment is made, what part of the border, I don't think, realistically, because it's going to be a programmatic spending. Every time you make such a permanent structure, you have to, figure out in the budget every time, how to maintain the technological requirement of it. And do we have the critical infrastructure to support this border management as well? Those are the questions that is left for decision makers, policymakers, and also the lawmakers as well to make. But the lives we've lost does it equate to the amount of money we're going to be spending? And those are the questions that most Nigerians and also the lawmakers have to make as well. But to answer your question categorically, it's going to be very hard to tell because, I don't have the raw intelligence of where these foreign fighters are coming in and where there is a need for the border for these fences to be made. But regardless, make no mistake that regardless of how far or how long the fences are, if people have intention of coming across your borders, they will. And places like, Pakistan and Pakistan and Afghanistan, despite the fact that, the Duran line, extended from that out to China, people are still using Tora Bora and Spin Bulldog, to actually, or Springer rather, to actually enter Afghanistan. So they don't mind the unforgiving terrain of Tora Bora. They're still finding a way to go over there. So if people are really determined actually to fight, to become a nefarious actor, they will find a way across those borders. So that is why the non-kinetic efforts of all these MDAs is necessary to actually solve these problems. Because again, those border construction cannot be the solution, standalone solution to solve the transnational militants that we find ourselves in.
Let me go to Dr. Adamu. Well, the question has now been, are we trying to keep them in or deter them from coming in? Because to a large extent, a lot of these terrorists are already in within our borders, right? So what is going to be, or what do you suggest will be the strategy? Do we get them out first, then build a wall to keep them from coming in? Or to build a wall, understanding that a lot of them are in already, then find a way to get them out? I don't know if you catch my drift here, Dr. Adamu.
Yeah, it's a beautiful question, and I'm hoping that the strategy would be, hybrid, as it were, a combination of the beauty of our situation in Nigeria, which unfortunately is also the failure of the MDAs that have responsibility for security. We already have beautiful instruments. I'll quickly mention them. We have the National Counterterrorism Strategy. We have the policy framework on countering violent extremism. We also have a few other, associated instruments, but these two are the major ones for addressing. Now, they recognize the fact that we have internal, homegrown, as it were, terrorists, and as well as external terrorists who come in. So if only we would implement these instruments fully, I don't think we would be sitting here, having this conversation about the construction of offenses. Yes, it is one of the considerations to reduce the influx of terrorists into the country. But then this was envisaged a long time ago, and perhaps if we had implemented these instruments, we would not be where we are. In terms of consideration for the instruments and what they've mentioned, they've talked about targeted physical barriers in high-risk zones. So, for instance, constructing fences in locations where we already know through intelligence that there is a crisscrossing. A good example would be around the Lake Chad Basin, where we know that ISWAP, the Islamic State in West Africa province, already has a base there in the islands on the Lake Chad. Another one is the Mandara Mountains in the border area between Cameroon and Nigeria. So examples, I can go on and on of targeted physical barriers in some of those locations. The second consideration in our instruments is smart surveillance and drones, satellite imaging, sensors, and recently AI to monitor activities and movement. There is enough technology. Believe me, if you put graduates of certain courses in a room, 20 of them, they would come up with different solutions to assist all of these components of smart surveillance. The third one is border force reform. We've talked about the Nigeria Immigration Service, the customs. The one we haven't mentioned is to reduce corruption, both in terms of the operation of these organizations, as well as the other associated regulatory bodies that supervise these organizations. And then, of course, we've mentioned increasing boots on ground. And then, of course, the last one is the cross-border security pacts. We must expand the security pacts among ECOWAS member states, and recently with the advent of the AES, the Sahelian states, we must also expand the cross-border pacts between us, either bilaterally or multilaterally. And then, of course, the operations of the multinational joint task force, and then, of course, the AU framework for joint operations. Now, all of these are already in these instruments that I mentioned. So it's really about implementation. Once it is implemented, it would address the internal terrorists that we have, as well as the external terrorists that perhaps may want to come in. If we do construct the wall, yes, it would help all of these 4 points that I've mentioned, but just like my co-discussant mentioned, it is only a strategic advent. It would not solve the problem if we do not, do these other things that I've mentioned.
So do we chase them out first and build a wall?
We can.
Or do we
so the thing
build a
about
wall by the fact they're here?
Yeah, the thing about terrorism, you can't chase them out. It's ideological. And that is why I didn't go into the details of the instruments that I mentioned, but the instruments recognizes the need for instance, counter-radicalization. It recognizes the need for de-radicalization. It recognizes the need for the soft approach in terms of our economic viability, livelihoods. Remember that when you are dealing with counter-terrorism, there are 3 elements, as it were, 3 groups. You've got the government authorities, you've got the bad guys, the terrorists, and then you have influence over us as a people. So this instrument recognizes that, and what the instruments try to do is to reduce the influence that the terrorists would have. So it's not really about chasing them out, but about reducing the capacity for the terrorists to have influence over the local population through de-radicalization, through economic empowerment, through counter-radicalization operations, and then, of course, the kinetic component that we have. At the end of the day, once we reduce the influence, and more importantly, suffocate the terrorist groups through denying them the oxygen that they use in breathing. And what is this oxygen? Their ability to generate funding. We can discuss this extensively. Their ability to acquire weaponry, both internally and externally. And then, of course, their ability to recruit new members. And I've mentioned some of the ways to do that. So really, this is how to address the terrorism challenge. It's not really about chasing them away. If you chase them away, they will still come back.
Okay. Let's take it to Major Adeleke as we begin to wind down. And this is just beyond the conversation around Nigeria, Africa. So if you look at Nigeria, bordered by maybe 4 countries, Chad somewhere, Niger, Cameroon, I think Benin Republic. But we just saw the visa ban by the United States government on about 10 countries. 7 of them are African countries. And a partial ban on other countries, African countries are also included. Where do you think Africa should start this conversation around putting some level of closure or approaching something close to an end within a timeline to building a safer Africa? Where if we want to start that conversation, because what I'm realizing now is the fact that for the fact that Rwanda is safe today doesn't guarantee that Rwanda is going to be safe tomorrow if borders around Rwanda like DR Congo and all of that are having the issues they're having. So what is happening in Chad is affecting us. So nobody's really safe in that sense. Where should we start this conversation about making Africa safer in 1 minute?
Oh, wow. It's a lot to unpack in 1 minute, but this I can tell you, I think from the Western and the Eastern construct, Northeast Nigeria is now the #1 safe haven for terrorist activities, not only in Sub-Saharan Africa, but globally. And this is the fact of the matter that we do not have institutions that is very continuous in nature. Change in government kind of reduces our appetite for securing Africa. Africa has not been secured in a long time, and it will not secure in the nearest future because of our appetite towards security. I'm not making any provocation, proclamation. There is just a historical context and historical fact and what I see happening on this current dispensation. We don't see security as the main bane of our existence. And until we see that, we will not be able to kind of counter a lot of, how the rest of the world view us. Africa is unstable, and until we have the political will to actually, kind of deal with this issue, will not be able to make any conversation that is quite reputable in nature to be able to say, you know what, we are very serious for this. So look at what's going on in Mali, Burkina Faso, and whatnot, and what is going on in Niger, Chad as well, and also bleeding into Nigeria. Of course, DRC, of course, almost there's, I mean, as of this morning, about 15 conflicts going on across Africa that can easily be dealt with. You know, so to answer your question, it's going to be extremely hard to Africa and the global south to make a stand that, you know what, we are ready to secure. But again, that could be a design or that could be a bug as well, depending on the optics at which you're looking at it.
Well, thank you, Major Adebe Adeleke, a retired immigrant, U.S. Army officer, joining us from our Abuja studio. Is also a human security expert. Mr. Kabiru Adamu, security risk management expert, MD, Beacon Security and Intelligence Limited. Gentlemen, as always, thank you for coming on the program and for your expertise.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
All right, when we come back after this break, we want to talk about the institution, one of Nigeria's most important institutions, the Independent National Electoral Commission. There's been a lot when it comes to our recruiting process. We're talking about building confidence in citizens to believe that their votes count. Where do we start from in fixing INEC? They've done some great things, but there's a lot that needs to be done. That's the next conversation after the break. Join us again.